So in honor of this Veterans Day, we want to dig a little deeper into this issue about veterans who, upon coming home, often have a tough time connecting with their families, with their friends, really with anyone who hasn't been through what they have. Many have trouble finding jobs, as you've just seen, or holding down those jobs when they do find them. But some, more than you think, end up sleeping on the streets of the very country they served. One of those veterans is Matt Farwell. He served as a soldier in the U.S. Army from 2005 to 2010, and he spent 16 months deployed in Afghanistan. I spoke to him just a little earlier, and I asked him to share more of his personal story. Take a listen. I wanted to read a part of something that you wrote. This was printed in the New York Times last month. Whatever the prediction, I could handle it, you write. 4.5 years in the Army, including 16 months as an infantryman in eastern Afghanistan, provided plenty of skills with no legal application in the civilian world. It was, however, wonderful preparation for being homeless. So no training in your 5 years as a soldier in the Army for an actual job. But in terms of surviving on the streets, it helped. Talk a little bit about that experience of returning home from war and then shortly after becoming homeless.
Well, sure. And first, I want to correct something. I mean, I did have job training. My job just has no application in the civilian world. So there's not many people looking to hire infantrymen or people that can carry a machine gun. But to answer your question, what it was like to come home, it's an odd experience to go to war and return, and I think it's a universal theme. I was couch surfing, staying with friends. I just had no stable shelter. But I did spend, probably about 2-3 weeks on the streets or in the woods, places like that.
And from what I understand, you were in or near Palo Alto, California area. I mean, this is home of Stanford University, home to some of the wealthiest people in this country. I mean, what was that like coming back and being surrounded by people going through a little bit of a different life experience than you were?
Well, it's interesting. And actually, Stanford was great because they have a 24-hour library. So that was a good place to go and get some sleep and, be able to use the internet and hang out. But it's odd. You feel a little bit detached from the world, and you kind of feel like you don't belong.
If you can remember back to those first few days upon returning from Afghanistan, from coming back into the civilian world, talk a little bit about, some of those first reactions, those first emotions that went through your mind. I mean, was there one emotion that sort of weighed heavier than the others?
The first few days weren't that dramatic. I mean, it was just nice to be home. I'd been overseas in Afghanistan for 16 months and was just kind of relieved. It was a little weird to walk around, see grocery stores, see fat people. That was a little bit odd. It was nice to see women and, but it's not necessarily the culture shock of the first few days. It's just realizing how many little subtle changes have taken place within your personality and within your limbic system to cope with the stresses of combat, and how those don't necessarily translate back to being in the U.S.
I just want to talk about one more thing with you,
Sure.
Matt, sort of a sad statistic about the suicide rate for veterans. By some counts, one veteran every 80 minutes takes his or her own life. That's about 18 each day. I know in your New York Times article that you wrote about at least one of your friends doing so, and knowing a lot more who have done so. A lot of people who are not involved in the military would find these figures shocking. 18 a day. Do you have any insight as to why this is so common? You survive a war zone and come home, and that's when, the real battle begins, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something, if you fight you're in combat, you struggle with. And my friend, actually, we're not sure whether it was a suicide or an accidental overdose, but it certainly was self-destructive, and I mean, I've had the same kind of impulses. The Army released a really good suicide study examining all the causes, and last year that you can find online on their website. And I think part of it is, again, the self-selective group of people that join. I think it's coming back and feeling the strains of post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, being numb, detached, not feeling like you belong, survivor's guilt. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. And again, that's with veterans. That statistic isn't just OIF veterans, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. It's all veterans. And it's also somewhat of a skewed statistic because it doesn't take into account, you know, things like single motor vehicle accidents or drug overdoses or alcohol-related fatalities that can often be masks for suicide. So, you know, if I had a silver bullet for it, I'd be in the Pentagon trying to help it stop, but I don't. I just think, you know, war is a very ugly thing, and I think after you've lived through it and you return back, there's a part of you that is still over there.